Last year, I moved into a small rental house just outside Richmond, Virginia. It was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, a tiny backyard, and a detached garage. But it was quiet, affordable, and close to my work. I'm 27, work remotely in IT, and I was ready to have a place to myself after years of noisy apartment buildings. The neighborhood was calm. Most of the residents were older couples or retirees. Everyone kept to themselves. For the first few weeks, I honestly felt lucky. I liked the space, the silence, and the feeling of independence. It was a normal, easy routine. Morning coffee, work during the day, a walk around the block in the evening, and a little TV at night. The first weird thing happened about 3 weeks in. It was a Thursday night, and I was wrapping up some emails at the kitchen table around 10:30. I heard what sounded like a faint clinking sound coming from the backyard. At first, I thought it might be the wind, or maybe an animal messing with the trash bins. When I looked through the window, I didn't see anything out of place, so I figured it was nothing. The next morning, I noticed the gate to the backyard was slightly open. I was pretty sure I had locked it. It wasn't wide open, just barely ajar, but enough to make me pause. I walked out, closed it fully, and secured the latch. I didn't think too much about it. Maybe the wind had pushed it, or maybe the latch didn't catch the last time. A few nights later, I had a couple friends over for pizza and to watch the game. They left around midnight, and I stayed up a little longer, cleaning up and shutting things down. Around 1:30 a.m., I was brushing my teeth when I heard a metallic scraping sound, similar to the one from before. It sounded like it was coming from the same spot, just outside the kitchen window near the gate. I walked over and flipped the porch light on. The yard looked still. The gate, again, was open. This time it was fully unlatched. I stepped outside cautiously and looked around. There was no one in sight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there. I locked the gate again and went back inside, double-checking all the doors and windows before going to bed. That night I kept waking up. I thought I heard something, a soft knock or a shuffle near the side of the house, but every time I got up to check, there was nothing there. A few days passed, and things seemed normal again. I didn't hear anything else. But then small things started to catch my attention. A lawn chair on the porch was tipped over one morning, even though there hadn't been any wind. The garden hose was stretched out across the yard, like someone had dragged it. I found a muddy footprint near the back steps that didn't match any of my shoes. That Tuesday night, something happened that made everything feel different. It was just after 11. I turned off the lights, locked up, and was in bed scrolling through my phone. The house was completely quiet except for the ceiling fan above me. Then I heard it. 3 knocks at the back door. Not loud, just steady and firm. I froze. It was late, and I hadn't heard anyone approach. I stayed in bed for a few seconds, just listening. Then the knocking came again, a little slower this time. I got up, grabbed my phone, and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. I didn't turn on any lights. I stood to the side of the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a man standing at the back door. He wasn't moving or knocking anymore, just standing there, facing the glass. He looked average, jeans, a hoodie, maybe in his 40s. His hands were at his sides, and he wasn't trying to open the door. He didn't have a flashlight or anything with him. I backed away from the window and stood there for a minute, not sure what to do. I didn't want to call 911 if it turned out to be someone harmless, but I also wasn't about to open the door. After a while, I went back to the window to check again. He was gone. The yard was empty. The gate was still shut. But the fear I felt standing there didn't leave. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I thought I heard something. A creak, a soft tap, maybe even footsteps on the back porch. I didn't see or hear anything else, but I kept my phone nearby and stayed alert until the sky started turning gray outside. In the morning, I walked out back to check the yard. I didn't expect to find anything, and for the most part, everything looked normal. But when I got to the back door, I noticed something I'd missed the night before. There were greasy smudges near the handle. They weren't obvious at first, but when the sunlight hit the glass, I saw them. Faint fingerprints, like someone had tried the door. That was enough for me to call the police. An officer came by later that morning. She was polite but didn't seem overly concerned. She looked around, took a few notes, and told me it was probably just someone passing through the alley that ran behind the property. A lot of people use it as a shortcut, she said. Sometimes they're just looking for a place to sit or catch a break. I nodded, even though I didn't believe it. The guy at my door hadn't looked lost or drunk. He looked like he was waiting for something. After she left, I bought a couple of motion sensor cameras and installed them, one above the back door, the other overlooking the gate. It made me feel a little better, like I had some control over the situation. For a while, things were quiet again. A full week passed with nothing out of the ordinary. I went back to work, started sleeping normally again, and stopped checking the cameras obsessively. Then, one night, I got a motion alert on my phone at 2:17 a.m. I was half asleep, but when I saw the notification, I opened the app immediately. The camera feed was in black and white, but it was clear enough to see the figure standing at the back door. Same hoodie, same jeans, same posture. He was standing a little closer this time, facing the door again. But what made my stomach drop was that his head was tilted slightly upward. He was looking straight into the camera. I didn't move for a few seconds. I just sat there in bed, staring at my phone screen, heart pounding. He stood there for about 15 seconds, then walked out of frame toward the side of the house. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my keys and wallet, and left through the front door. I didn't even check the backyard. I drove to a friend's place across town and stayed there until morning. When I came back to the house later that day, I reviewed the footage again. It was just like I remembered. He looked right into the camera, then calmly walked away. The gate was open when I got back, but there was no other sign of him. I called the police again. Another report, another visit, another patrol promised for the next few nights. But like before, there wasn't much they could do. The man hadn't broken in. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't technically committed a crime. I stopped staying at the house after that. I'd go back to grab clothes, check the mail, or water the plants, but I never stayed overnight again. About a month later, I broke the lease and moved into a different place across town, a second-floor apartment in a complex with gates and cameras and people nearby. Before I left, I pulled the video files off the security app and saved them. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that it really happened. I never found out who he was. The police didn't identify him, and no one in the neighborhood ever mentioned seeing anything strange. It's like he was only ever interested in my house. Sometimes late at night, I still think about the way he looked at the camera. He wasn't surprised it was there. He wanted to be seen, and I still don't know what he wanted, or what he would have done if I hadn't locked the door. I'm a 35-year-old single dad living in Colorado. I work as a contractor, mostly renovation jobs, and when I get a free weekend, I try to make time for my daughter, Ellie. She's 6, loves road trips, animals, and anything with sugar in it. A few weeks ago, I planned a surprise for her. We were going to visit her grandparents on their small farm, about 3 hours southeast of where we live. It was supposed to be an easy, quiet trip. We'd take the back roads most of the way, those 2-lane highways that cut through hills, old fields, and towns with a single gas station. We left mid-morning on a Saturday in my old silver Tacoma. Ellie had her snacks, her stuffed bunny, and one of those little magnetic drawing boards to keep her busy. About an hour into the drive, I noticed a dark green SUV behind us. At first, I didn't think anything of it. There's not much traffic out that way, so seeing another vehicle usually just means someone else headed to the same nowhere. But after about 15 minutes, I realized the SUV hadn't passed me, even though I was going a little under the limit. It stayed there, a couple of car lengths behind, just close enough that I could make out the shape of the driver. Definitely male, but I couldn't see any details. It wasn't tailgating aggressively or anything, just hanging there. That's what started to bother me. We passed a few stretches where the road was open enough to pass, and he never tried. I slowed down a bit just to see what would happen. He slowed down too. Not right away, but enough to make it obvious he was reacting to me. My gut tightened. I glanced over at Ellie, who was busy drawing and completely unaware. A few more minutes went by. We came up to a fork where I could take a smaller road that loops around toward an old campground. I didn't normally go that way, but I wanted to see if the SUV would follow. I turned, casually, like it was part of my route. In my mirror, I watched as the SUV turned too. Now I knew it wasn't just coincidence. The road got narrower, surrounded by trees and brush, with long patches of no visibility behind curves. The SUV stayed right behind us, not speeding up, not backing off, just holding its place like it was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off, told myself it could be a neighbor from a nearby town taking the same route, but my gut wasn't buying that. About 20 minutes later, I saw a small gas station up ahead, just one of those old spots with a single pump and a concrete lot. I turned in and parked next to the building, hoping the SUV would keep going. But it didn't. It pulled into the lot and parked 2 spots away. I sat in the truck for a second, pretending to check my phone. The guy didn't get out of the SUV. He just sat there, engine running, windows up. I looked over at Ellie, who was still completely at ease, swinging her legs and asking if she could get a soda. I told her to stay in the truck for a second, and I got out to stretch. I walked slowly toward the building, glancing at the SUV out of the corner of my eye. I couldn't see the guy clearly. His windows were tinted just enough to hide his face, but I knew he was watching. Inside the station, I bought a couple drinks and asked the clerk if she'd seen the SUV before. She gave it a glance through the window, shrugged, and said she didn't recognize it. She added that most people passing through were either locals or campers heading south. When I came back out, the SUV was gone. Just gone. I looked down the road in both directions. Nothing. The place was quiet again. I exhaled, tried to shake it off, and figured maybe he'd decided to turn around. We got back on the road, and I kept an eye on the mirrors the whole time. For about 30 minutes, there was nothing behind us but open highway. I started to relax a little. We were less than an hour from my parents' place. Then, just as we came around a bend that opened up to a long straight stretch, I saw headlights behind us. Way back, but closing in. I squinted and felt my stomach drop. Same shape, same dark green SUV. I didn't say anything to Ellie, but I gripped the wheel a little tighter. I made another turn, this one onto a gravel county road I normally wouldn't take. And sure enough, it followed. The tension in my chest got worse with every mile. Eventually, I pulled into an old roadside picnic area, just a clearing with a couple of wooden tables and a trash bin. I figured if I was being followed, this would be a safe place to stop. Plenty of open space, good visibility. We got out. I let Ellie stretch and pretend to chase butterflies while I pretended to text on my phone. I waited, watched, but the SUV didn't come around the corner. I kept checking. 5 minutes went by. 10. Nothing. It never showed. I don't know if the guy turned off, or if he stopped somewhere and waited, or if I just finally shook him. But I've never felt more watched in my life. I didn't tell Ellie anything. We got back in the truck and finished the drive. We made it to my parents' place by dinner. Ellie ran into the house like nothing had happened, and I followed, trying not to let the dread show on my face. I never saw that SUV again. But I still think about it. About how long he followed us. About how he seemed to mimic every turn, every stop, without ever doing anything overt. And the part that really gets under my skin, he never tried to pass. Not once. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or any of that paranormal stuff. I'm 39, work as a mechanic in upstate New York, and live a pretty normal life. My wife, Anna, passed away from a sudden illness 3 years ago, and since then, I've done my best to hold things together for our son. He's 10 now, stronger than he should have to be. I visit Anna's grave once or twice a month, usually in the morning before work. But last October, something about that day hit me harder than usual. It was the anniversary of the night she collapsed, and I couldn't focus at the shop. Around 9 p.m., I closed up early and decided to drive to the cemetery. I didn't even think twice about the time. Our town cemetery isn't a spooky place during the day. It's well kept, with big maples along the gravel paths and a view of the hills behind it. But at night, even with a little moonlight, the place changes. It's not dramatic or theatrical, just silent in a way that presses on you. I guess I was too wrapped up in my own head to care. I parked just off the side lot and slipped through the small side gate, which the groundskeeper sometimes leaves unlatched. I didn't have a flashlight, just my phone, and the screen was dim from all the notifications I hadn't cleared. I made my way toward her plot, letting my boots crunch the gravel as quietly as possible. Anna's headstone sits near the back edge of the cemetery, not far from a patch of tall hedges that line the property. I knelt there, just like I always do, ran my fingers along the top of the stone. I said a few things, nothing profound. Mostly just thoughts I'd been holding in. Told her how our boy was doing, how work was fine, how I missed her laugh. That's when I noticed the air felt heavier. It was subtle, not cold exactly, just still in a way that made me stop mid-sentence. I told myself it was just the season shifting. Mid-fall in upstate New York can flip from breezy to dead calm in a heartbeat. But then I started hearing something faint. It was a sound I couldn't place at first, like fabric brushing against stone. I turned around slowly, phone still in my hand, and scanned the darkness behind me. I didn't see anything unusual at first, just rows of graves and a few dark shapes that could have been trees. Then, deeper into the shadows near the far end, I noticed a figure standing between two headstones. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. But it didn't move. It was just there. I stood up, casually dusted off my jeans, and pretended not to notice. I've worked night shifts before. I know how easily shadows can look like people when your brain's tired. Still, I started walking back toward the path, slow and steady, trying not to look over my shoulder. Halfway to the gate, I glanced back, and now the figure had moved. It was closer. Not by a lot, but it had definitely shifted position. And it wasn't alone anymore. A second one stood off to the right. I couldn't make out any faces, but they both looked like they were wearing pale, almost colorless clothing that hung loose around them. Long sleeves, no hoods or hats. They weren't moving, just watching. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something sharp. I kept walking, this time a little faster. The gravel path curved slightly, and I took the bend quickly, hoping the hedges would block their view. I wasn't running. I didn't want to give off that energy. But I was definitely done with the idea of lingering. I passed a small maintenance shed near the fence and caught my breath for a second behind it. I peeked back toward where the figures had been. They weren't there anymore. I felt my pulse speed up. I started moving again, this time straight toward the side gate. I could see the top of it just ahead when I heard something, just the faintest shuffle on the path behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know how close they were. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, louder than I expected, and I stepped onto the sidewalk. I let the gate fall closed behind me and kept walking toward my truck. But something made me stop. Across the street, about 2 houses down, a dark car was parked under a tree. Its engine wasn't on. The windows were up. But I could see the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching the gate. I froze. I wasn't in a bad neighborhood, but I also knew that late at night, anything can happen anywhere. The figure in the car leaned forward a bit, like they were trying to get a better look at me. I didn't wait. I unlocked my truck, climbed in, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. The car didn't follow me. It just stayed there, parked in the shadows. When I got home, I locked every door and sat on the couch with all the lights on. I didn't sleep that night. The whole thing replayed in my head again and again. Those silent figures in the cemetery, that parked car, the way the air had felt still and strange, like something was pressing down on me. I kept thinking about how close they had gotten without a sound. What would have happened if I'd stayed 5 minutes longer? I haven't gone back to the cemetery after dark since then. I still visit Anna, but only during daylight now. I tell myself that what I saw could have been people just holding a memorial of their own. Maybe they were mourning someone too. But that car, that feeling in my chest when the figures disappeared, I can't explain that away. I don't think I want to. I grew up in a beat-up trailer park just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. This was back in the early 2000s, when I was about 10 years old. My mom had left when I was a toddler, and my dad, he worked long shifts at a sheet metal factory and didn't make much, raised me and my older brother the best he could. We didn't have much, but we had each other. The trailer park was the kind of place where half the lots had broken down cars sitting in the grass, and a few trailers leaned like they were about to give up. The people were rough around the edges, too. Some were decent, just struggling, but others, well, there were a couple of neighbors I wouldn't want to run into after dark. There weren't many kids my age, and the ones that were either had older siblings to protect them or stayed inside because their parents didn't want them running around the park. I didn't have much of a choice. My dad was gone from sunup to sundown, and my brother, who was 13, was usually out with his friends doing who knows what. So I kept to myself most days, riding my beat-up bike around or kicking rocks along the edge of the property. Behind the park was a patch of woods that stretched out past the last row of trailers. They weren't deep, just enough trees to block out the view of the highway. But there was a creek running through there that everyone knew about. The older kids called it Dead Drop because of the steep slope leading down to the water. One Saturday, when my dad was at work and my brother was off with his friends, I decided to walk out to the creek. I wasn't really supposed to go alone, but it was a warm day and I was bored out of my mind. I figured I'd go for just a little bit and be back before anyone noticed. I followed the dirt path behind our trailer, past the rusted-out fence that used to separate the lots from the woods. The trail was narrow and overgrown, but I'd walked it before. When I reached the edge of the slope, I could hear the soft trickle of water down below. The creek wasn't much, maybe knee-deep in some spots, but the drop to get there was a solid 10 feet and steep. You had to hang onto roots and slide down slow to make it. I stood there for a minute, thinking about heading back. The air was still. Too still. There wasn't any wind, no birds chirping, just dead quiet. I tried to shake it off and started climbing down, taking it slow. About halfway, I slipped a little and slid on the mud, but I caught myself on a thick tree root. My hands got caked in dirt, but I made it to the bottom in one piece. The creek was clear and shallow. I started tossing rocks, watching the ripples fade out. I should have felt peaceful, but something felt off. I don't know how to describe it. Like the woods were holding their breath. I tried not to think about it. I was about to head back when I noticed something on the opposite side of the creek. It looked like a big, mossy lump next to a fallen tree. At first I thought it was just a pile of branches, or maybe a rotted log. But then I saw it move. Not fast, just a shift, like it was adjusting itself. That's when I realized it wasn't part of the tree. I froze. It was hunched, low to the ground, blending in with the mud and leaves. I couldn't see a face, but it had arms, long, sinewy ones, and one of them twitched as it leaned into the log, almost like it was listening to me. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I kept thinking, maybe it didn't see me. Maybe if I stayed quiet, it'd leave. But then it turned its head, or what I assumed was its head, toward me. It wasn't fast. It wasn't threatening. It just turned, slowly, like it was curious. That was enough for me. I turned and started climbing up the muddy slope as fast as I could. My foot slipped and I scraped my shin on a rock, but I didn't stop. I used my hands, my knees, anything I could, clawing my way back up to the trail. I didn't hear it following me, but I could feel it. That feeling you get when something's watching you, too heavy to be imagined. When I got to the top, I didn't look back. I ran straight through the woods, through the hole in the fence, all the way back to our trailer. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, even though it was the middle of the day. I peeked out the back window, watching the tree line, expecting something to come out after me. But nothing ever did. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother, not my dad. I thought maybe they'd laugh or think I was making it up. A few days passed, and I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or an animal I'd never seen before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. A week later, one of the neighbor kids, Jason, a kid my brother's age, broke his leg trying to climb down to the creek. Word got around fast. He said the mud gave out, and he tumbled halfway down before something caught him and kept him from sliding into the rocks at the bottom. He said it felt like a hand. He didn't see anyone, though, just heard something shuffle off into the brush before he passed out from the pain. That's when I really started to wonder if I hadn't imagined it. I never went back to the creek. Even now, as an adult, I think about it every time I visit my dad's old place. The woods are still there, and so is the path. But I won't walk it. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't know if it meant to scare me or protect me. But whatever it wasn't human, and it definitely wasn't alone. Back in 2019, I booked a solo cruise out of Miami as a kind of self-reward. I had just wrapped up my nursing degree and landed my first job at a hospital in Atlanta. It was a 4-night Caribbean trip, nothing fancy, but I figured I'd use the time to decompress before diving into real adult responsibilities. I'd never traveled alone before, and I wasn't exactly a social butterfly, but I figured a cruise ship would be a safe way to dip my toes into solo travel. There were plenty of people around, food everywhere, and always something to do. That first day, it was everything I hoped it'd be. Good weather, music by the pool, fruity drinks, people laughing. I spent most of the afternoon on the sun deck, reading and people watching. Later that evening, I ran into this guy in the elevator. He looked older than the typical cruise crowd, maybe in his late 50s. He had this washed-out look, pale skin, thin hair, eyes that didn't blink enough. I gave him a polite nod, like you do when you're in close quarters with a stranger, but he didn't nod back. He just stared. It wasn't aggressive, just off. I got off 2 floors early just to avoid standing next to him any longer. I didn't think much of it at first. Ships are full of weird people. But I saw him again the next morning at breakfast. He was seated alone at a table on the opposite side of the buffet, but when I glanced over, he was already looking at me. No food on his plate, just sitting there with his hands on the table like he'd been waiting for someone. I tried not to let it get to me. I reminded myself it could have been coincidence. Maybe he was just awkward or on the spectrum or something. Still, I felt that little twinge of instinct. Something's not right. By the afternoon, it happened again. I went to grab a towel from the pool deck locker, and when I turned around, there he was, standing near the glass railing. He didn't approach, didn't smile, didn't say a word. Just stood still, arms at his sides, watching the water. Or maybe watching me. I ducked into the nearest bathroom and waited a good 10 minutes before coming back out. When I returned to the pool, he was gone. That night I stayed in my cabin. I didn't feel like going to the show or dinner. I kept the curtains shut and the door locked. I tried watching TV, but the screen kept reflecting the interior of the room, and I found myself glancing at my own reflection more than the actual program. Around 1 a.m., I was just starting to doze off when I heard the door handle jiggle. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to snap me awake. I sat up in bed and stared at the door. The handle turned slightly, not enough to open, just enough to make it click. Then it stopped. I stayed completely still for what felt like 10 minutes, listening. Nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just someone drunk trying to get into the wrong cabin. That happens on cruises, right? I even asked one of the staff if they had issues with that kind of thing. He laughed it off, said it's common with guests drinking too much or getting turned around after late-night events. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I turned a corner on the ship, I expected to see him, and more often than not, I did. I'd be walking through the souvenir shop, and he'd be browsing the same aisle. I'd head to the buffet, and he'd be a few people ahead in line. Once I went to the top deck just to clear my head, and he was sitting in a lounge chair, staring out at the ocean. But he looked over his shoulder the moment I stepped outside, like he knew I was coming. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know who I'd even talk to. It's not like he ever did anything threatening. He never spoke to me, never made a move. But that somehow made it worse. It was like being haunted by a person who refused to acknowledge they were haunting you. On the third night, I forced myself to go to the theater for a magic show, hoping a crowded space would ease my nerves. I found a seat near the back. Midway through the performance, I turned to look around, and he was 3 rows behind me, leaning forward slightly in his seat. He wasn't watching the stage. He was watching me. I left early. I walked fast, not quite running, but close. I made it to the stairwell, took the steps 2 at a time, and headed straight for the top deck. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the fresh air would help, or maybe I just didn't want to feel boxed in. It was nearly midnight. The ship was quiet. I stood at the railing and stared out at the Black Sea, trying to ground myself. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, even. I turned, already knowing. He was there, 20 feet away, leaning against the opposite railing, not walking, not talking, just there. I didn't say a word. I turned and walked away, fast. This time I did run. I got back to my cabin, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the knob. I know how flimsy that is, but it made me feel better. The next morning, when we docked, I left as fast as I could. As I waited for my luggage near the terminal, I spotted him one last time, standing alone, his suitcase beside him. Still staring. We never spoke, not once. It's been years since that trip, but I still think about him. I still feel that tightness in my chest when I hear slow footsteps behind me. And I still wonder, did he follow me on purpose, or was I just convenient? I used to be a cop. 5 years in, I'd seen enough stuff to know how fast a simple call can turn into something else entirely. But nothing prepared me for what happened in March of 2021. I was on shift in the middle of the day, blue skies, light traffic, nothing unusual. I'd pulled into a drive-thru to grab lunch before heading back on patrol. I was halfway through ordering when I spotted a familiar face stepping into a red sedan across the parking lot. His name was Dennis Gilder Jr. I'd seen the bulletin go around the department earlier that week. He had an active felony warrant out of Illinois, and now here he was, maybe 40 feet away, slipping into a car like he didn't have a care in the world. I pulled out of the line immediately and radioed it in. A second unit was close by and met up with me a minute later. We followed the car for maybe a block before I hit the lights. It pulled over without much hesitation. Honestly, I thought it was going to be routine. I approached the passenger side while my partner went to the driver's window. I could already see Dennis had his window cracked, and a woman was in the driver's seat. I gave the usual line. "You've got a warrant, Dennis. I'm gonna need your ID." He claimed he didn't have it on him. I asked him to step out of the car. Calm, professional. He ignored me. I asked again, and again. 4 or 5 times, and nothing. He just sat there. I was trying to keep it cool, but the silence from him and the twitchy look in his eyes started raising every red flag I had. That's when he rolled the window up completely. He shoved the woman over with both arms, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The woman was trying to push back in, like she knew something bad was about to happen. I moved around to the front of the car, raised my voice, and shouted for him to stop the vehicle. He didn't. My partner reached in to try and stop him from the side, but it didn't work. The car lurched forward. And instinct, stupid, dangerous instinct, kicked in. I jumped onto the hood. At first, he wasn't going fast, maybe 10, 15 miles per hour. I crouched low, drew my weapon, and aimed through the windshield, shouting at him to stop. I remember thinking maybe I could scare him into giving up. But then he floored it. Suddenly, we were flying through a suburban stretch doing close to 50. The wind was ripping past my ears, and I was sliding back toward the windshield wipers. I tried to steady myself, but the car jolted as he swerved left to avoid a train crossing. My weapon flew out of my hand, clattering onto the road behind us. My right shoe came off. I was losing control. The next thing I saw was a construction zone. The road narrowed, uneven gravel kicking up everywhere. Dennis didn't slow down. He actually sped up. I saw a ditch up ahead, deep and jagged. That's when I knew this wasn't just an escape for him. He didn't care what happened to me. He wasn't trying to lose the cops. He was trying to shake me off. The car hit a bump at full speed, and I was launched. My body slammed into the ditch like a sack of bricks. I didn't even feel the pain at first. Just the impact, like I'd been unplugged from the world for a second. Then it hit. White-hot pain that radiated from my lower back all the way down my legs. I couldn't move. I couldn't even roll over. I could hear sirens coming closer, gravel crunching under tires. But all I could focus on was trying to breathe through the pain. My partner pulled up seconds later and radioed for medics. I just laid there, staring up at the sky, wondering if my spine was shattered. I honestly thought I might never stand again. At the hospital, they confirmed I'd fractured a vertebra in my lower back. I spent weeks in a brace and months in physical therapy, but even when my body started healing, the nightmares didn't stop. I found out later Dennis had kept driving for another mile before the car broke down. He ditched it, broke into a random garage, and stole a second vehicle before finally being caught 2 days later. The woman he pushed out of the car was okay, shaken up, but unharmed. Dennis ended up getting sentenced to 5 years. He even sent an apology letter through the department. I read it, and honestly, I forgave him. Not for him, for me. I went back to work after about 3 months, but something was different. Every time I stepped out of the cruiser, my heart rate spiked. Every traffic stop, every routine call, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I came to dying on a quiet street in broad daylight. By the end of 2024, I turned in my badge. People ask if I regret it, leaving the force, stepping away after one bad call. But it wasn't one bad call. It was knowing how easily everything can go sideways. It was reliving that ride every time I closed my eyes. It was the moment I was thrown off the hood of a car and realized I didn't want to risk dying that way again. That moment never really leaves me. And even now, years later, if I'm crossing a street and a car slows too suddenly, or a driver looks a little too wild-eyed, my body locks up. I remember the engine, the wind, the helplessness. I remember thinking, this is it. And somehow it wasn't. In the fall of 2017, I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the forest. At the time, I was 29 and working a stressful IT job in Seattle. I'd been dealing with burnout for months and wanted to unplug from everything. No emails, no people, no traffic noise. Just me, my SUV, and as much silence as the Pacific Northwest could offer. I picked a remote spot using some backcountry mapping forms. It was about 4 hours outside the city, then another 90 minutes along rocky logging roads. I brought everything I needed: extra gas, water, tools, a satellite map printout, and backup batteries. I even converted the back of my SUV into a sleeping space with a sleeping pad, a thick bag, and blackout curtains on the windows. No cell signal, but I was fine with that. The first day felt perfect. I parked in a wide clearing near a quiet, slow-moving creek. There were no tire tracks nearby, no wrappers or broken bottles, no sign anyone had been through in a long time. I set up a fire, cooked some ramen, and watched the sun disappear behind the pines. It was cold enough to bundle up, but not freezing, just brisk and quiet. I hadn't felt that kind of stillness in years. When it got dark, I climbed into the back of my SUV and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. I left the side windows cracked for air and kept my knife next to me out of habit, not paranoia. I fell asleep to the sound of the creek and some distant owls. Sometime in the night, I woke up. It wasn't sudden, more like my brain eased me into consciousness. Something was off. At first, I thought it was the cold, or maybe a coyote howling, but then I heard it. A voice, actually multiple voices. Soft and low, like chanting. It was hard to tell how far away they were. The sound was being carried by the wind, like it was drifting through the trees. I lay there completely still, listening. The voices weren't loud, but they weren't random either. There was a rhythm to them, too steady to be conversation and too slow to be singing. I kept trying to come up with logical explanations. Maybe a group camping nearby, maybe a night hike, maybe a recording. But the closest marked campground was 20 miles back, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for hours. I sat up slowly and grabbed my knife. I didn't want to make a sound or turn on a light. I just listened. Eventually, the voices faded. I don't know how long they lasted. Could have been 2 minutes or 20. I didn't fall asleep easily after that. Every time the wind moved through the trees, I thought I heard footsteps. And then, just as I was starting to drift off again, I heard tapping. Light at first, like fingertips brushing against the glass. The tapping got louder. It was deliberate. I stopped breathing, gripping the knife so tight my knuckles went white. I lay there motionless, eyes open, staring up at the SUV ceiling. Then came the shape. Even through the condensation on the windows, I could see the outline of a face. Just faint, like someone leaning in, trying to look inside. Their breath fogged up part of the glass. I couldn't see details, just the shape of a head and the faint suggestion of eyes. I didn't think. I screamed, loud and rough, a kind of guttural shout that tore through my throat. The shape jerked back fast. I lunged forward, slammed my hand into the door to hit the lock button, and scrambled into the driver's seat. I turned the key and flicked on the headlights. The clearing lit up, but it was empty. Just trees, dirt, and the edge of the creek. I didn't see where they went. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. But I knew what I saw. I knew that wasn't a dream. I sat there for over an hour, engine idling, hands still wrapped around the wheel. Every branch that creaked in the wind made me jump. When the sun finally started to rise, I got out and checked the area. A few yards from the SUV, in the loose dirt near the trees, I found them. Barefoot prints. Just a few, small and shallow. They didn't come from a direction. They just started and ended. I packed up without eating or even boiling water. I drove aimlessly for hours down back roads, not even sure where I was going. I found another clearing near a rocky hill and parked, too tired to keep driving. It felt more open there, brighter. But I was still on edge. That night, I built a big fire and set up sticks in a ring around the SUV. I didn't think it would do much, but I wanted anything that might make noise if someone approached. I sat by the fire for hours, knife on my lap, trying not to stare into the woods. Sometime after midnight, I heard snapping branches. I killed the fire with water, jumped into the SUV, and locked everything. A few minutes later, I saw movement in the trees, a figure, fast and low, like they were trying to avoid being seen. They moved between the trunks and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all. I drove out as soon as there was enough light to see the road. The forest, which had felt so peaceful 2 days earlier, now felt like it was watching me. I didn't stop until I hit paved roads and saw a gas station. Even now, I don't have an explanation. I never went back to that area, and I haven't done a solo trip since. I still think about that face, that tapping, and I keep wondering, how long had they been watching me before they knocked?
If these stories sent a chill down your spine, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe for more eerie tales. What would you do if you were caught in one of these unsettling situations? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear what's on your mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.